Welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of Gamecock.
This is Rodgers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rodgers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into Gamecock Pod Live for May the 21st, episode number 1753. As we move into the summer of Shane, it's right around the corner, and Alex Jones from the BigSpur.com will be joining me shortly to preview what is a star-studded list of official visitors. I just went through and put down all the other official visits, and South Carolina is involved in a lot of big boy recruiting. Then after Alex, I'll be joined by my good friend Mike Uva, resident Boston native. Dad's a high school legendary football coach up there, played at Assumption College, works at Watch Fox 57, now still a contributor at Gamecock Central. We'll get his thoughts on Gamecock football. Mike has been doing an extensive breakdown position by position. And then, of course, we have to talk about the Jordan situation with Bill Belichick. I'm sure Mike will have thoughts on that. It's always a blast when he joins us. Today's show is brought to you by Nana's Porch, the award-winning full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte, Fort Mill, Rock Hill area. Nana's Porch is your go-to for all your catering needs, whether it's a banquet, a wedding, a corporate event. Maybe it's a big graduation party for a college or high school graduation, an anniversary celebration like a golden 50th wedding anniversary for your parents or grandparents. Maybe it's a quinceañera or a bar mitzvah. Or maybe it's a rehearsal dinner before the wedding. You want Chris to drop off some food. So go to the homepage, nanasporch.com. That's NANASPORCH.com. And even if you don't have a catering event, as we bring Alex Jones in, I'm sure he's had some of Nana's Porch award-winning pimento cheese. It's the best damn pimento cheese on the planet. And the hardest part of the decision when you go to nanasporch.com is deciding how many containers of smoky jalapeno and how many containers of the great regular flavor am I going to order, because it's so affordably priced. Shipping is free of charge. After you decide, the rest is easy. Checkout is simple, safe, and secure. Nana's Porch award-winning pimento cheese. You'll love it. I guarantee it. Well, Alex, welcome in. Gamecock baseball season ended with a thud, just like we expected it to last night, as the Gamecocks get bounced out of the SEC tournament. with an 11-3 loss to Florida. Gamecocks finish 28-29. That is the record for losses in a season by a Gamecock baseball team. And Paul Mainieri, after the game, was asked about Terry Rooney. Oh, Terry's a great coach, a great recruiter. He's going nowhere. Asked if he had the support of the administration. Yes, he said, simply, yes. I think the marinara sauce has gone bad. I think it's time to throw out the pasta and the sauce and start over. I wonder if you have any opinions on that. And I've actually compiled for John Whittle, even before he compiles his hot list, if Paul Mainieri is let go or they reach some kind of settlement agreement, my hot list. But welcome in. Are you ready for the summer of Shane? It's right around the corner.
Yes, the last week without feel like we'll have a few more weeks till camp start, but the last week before official visit season really gets underway, and once you get those official visits and camp season underway, then you roll into July, and then before you know it, football season's here. So it's really, you get into this summer portion and things really start to get rolling, and next weekend those summer official visits start rolling in.
No doubt. So, yeah, any opinions on Gamecock baseball?
Yeah, not a great first season for a new first head coach, and you get into the off season, and it's not going to be easy to rebuild that roster, because you got some guys leaving, you got some guys going, if you imagine to the draft, a guy like Ethan Petrie, a guy who could be drafted pretty high in the MLB draft, and there's just going to be a lot of it's going to be a lot to rebuild, and it's not going to be easy coming off of a season that you had, just because guys are going to want to go play for one of these other schools probably who are playing for a national championship or things like that, and a lot of teams need pitchers, need infielders, need whatever, and it's going to be a challenge to continue to rebuild that roster, and that is going to be a huge offseason for South Carolina baseball to see what they can do to find a way to get back to what they were.
No doubt. Look, our good friend John Whittle, when he says a guy stinks as a position coach, you can pretty much that's the national consensus, because there's nobody close to that program. My good friend Jamie Bradford over on the Chief Sports app and network, he has gone in depth behind the scenes because he has tremendous sources. He played at South Carolina for Ray Tanner. There's just a level of toxicity there I don't think you can come back from, because if you look at Shane Beamer, if you look at even Ashley Chastain Woodard in her first season and what her second season is going to be like, and if you look at Dawn Staley, their players are their best recruiters. When you have an excellent culture, players are willing to run through a brick wall for the coaches, and the coaches are willing to run through a brick wall because they have their players' backs. It's easy to bounce back. Look, Dawn Staley came in and you could hear every word that was said because there was only 200 or 300 people in Colonial Life Arena when they were getting hammered by Auburn and Vanderbilt and Tennessee and everybody else in the SEC. But I don't really remember her blaming players. Paul Mainieri, I'll have more. I'll share my one big thing from yesterday's podcast on assigning blame. Great coaches don't blame their players. They stand up, they take the bullets, they say, hey, I got to do a better job. Let's look at Vic Schaefer, okay, who South Carolina beat 3 out of 4 times, and they really dominated them every single time except the one time they were in Austin. You just can't not accept responsibility as a coach. Big Schaefer's like, I didn't have my team prepared to play. That's on me. I've got to coach better. I've got to get them to understand the level of physicality and the intensity and play with a sense of urgency. Okay, he didn't stand up there and say, well, Rory Harmon's playing on one leg and, Madison Booker, she hadn't been worth a crap any of the 3 times we lost to South Carolina. Our bigs couldn't throw it in the ocean from point blank range. My team's just not very good because I don't have very good players. I mean, you just don't see coaches do that. Paul Mainieri continues to do that. And only losers and insecure, over-the-hill coaches that have no business competing in the best sports conference in America, those are the only kind of people that are going to make those comments.
Yeah, and you have to imagine that type of word gets out to recruits and transfer portal recruits because these guys are paying attention to whatever's going on in a program. They're going to, especially a program that's coming off a tough season, they're going to try to find out everything they can about a program and where they want to go. And I think you have to imagine some of that word's going to get out, which makes me think just how difficult it is going to be to build their roster. And can they do it? I guess to rebuild the roster, I guess we'll see, but. Like I said, it's going to be tough. It is because it's just we don't know right now. How many pieces are going to have to be replaced from this roster. But I mean, we'll see. But it's going to be an interesting offseason. That's for sure.
No doubt. All right, so I'll save my hot list to the end of the show. Alex, thanks for being here. You do a great job along with Hale McGranahan covering football recruiting. And so let's start with the Rasul Faison situation. We know he's hired the prominent attorney representing players, Darren Heitner. Just to be clear, there's a podcast that used to have a very similar name. I had to rebrand my podcast to get away from that farce of a podcast. They said South Carolina hired Darren Heitner for Rasul Faison, but that was not the case. Rasul Faison, and he was advised to seek him out by somebody, and he hired him. How are we feeling about Rasul Faison? And I'm assuming he will continue, like when the team gets back together after the Memorial Day weekend and they start the summer program, he will be with the team. And you have to think the NCAA's never won a lawsuit, so it's got to be looking pretty good, right?
Yeah, and to your question about really nothing's going to change for Rasul Faison. Like he'll kind of just like with spring practice, he'll do everything everybody else is doing just to continue to be ready for whatever that call does come. And with Darren Heitner and hiring Darren Heitner, I think that was just the next step in the process for Rasul. And Darren Heitner is very experienced in this field, a guy that's a lot of people go to. Miles Studi, actually, Miles Studi's a little bit of a different situation, but he helped Miles Studi on the basketball team get that extra year of eligibility and get that waiver. So I think there was obviously some familiarity there, but he's one of the top guys in that business. And I think, like I said, that was just the next step for Rasul Faison. And really, there's no update right now, but we'll see just how much longer. I think part of the process of hiring Darren Heitner was to help speed the process up, just because I think we all know with the NCAA these things can take a little while and they kind of move at their own pace a little bit. But I think hiring Darren Heitner was just that next step to try to speed this process up, because you have to think about South Carolina's going to want the word pretty quickly one way or the other. Just to play the hypothetical game, if Rasul Faison isn't ruled eligible or doesn't get the waiver, they got to figure out, what to do at running back, just because then they've got 3, scholarship guys with, Oscar Adaway, Matthew Fuller, and Jerome Howell. And then what are you going? You really want to have 4. That's kind of the ideal number, 4 or 5. So, if Rasul Faison isn't ruled eligible, what they want to maybe have a plan to, do they move, maybe a Jaquel Holman to running back? Because there was some talk about that in the recruiting process with him. Like, what do they do there? So I think, I don't think it's going to come to that, to be honest. I don't think they're going to have to worry about that part of it. But I think they just want to find out sooner rather than later. And hiring a very experienced Darren Heitner in that field is something that's going to help speed that process up. That's their hope.
All right, so I'm going to ask my next question, then I'm going to do something to boost our internet connection here. So last week on Thursday, Shane Beamer put out the welcome home with the Palmetto State flag, but he didn't put the hashtag 2026. So we know the first one's a welcome home. Is it a 26 or 27? And then Friday night at 10 o'clock, 10 p.m., he puts out a welcome home, says there's nothing like getting a call at 10 p.m. from a guy after a spring game still wearing a uniform who wants to be a Gamecock. So there's 2 welcome homes out there. The summer of Shane has begun. Talk about those, and I'm going to be right back in less than 30.
Yeah, so with the 2 welcome homes last week, we'll see. I'm not sure on the process of how long those are going to take, but that's kind of, I think South Carolina need to get. Obviously, recruiting is going great right now, but you always want to have some momentum going into your summer official visit schedule. And I think getting 2 guys to go ahead and jump in with welcome homes, I think that was kind of key to get key stretch for South Carolina recruiting going and get some momentum going. And we'll see. I'm not sure on timelines for the commitments to be revealed, but we'll see kind of moving forward.
All right, good stuff. All right, so the first big, and that is a big weekend. And so let's talk about these guys. I mean, it gets off to a bang. Okay, you've got the big 4-star defensive tackle from North Carolina, Pierre Dean, 6'5", 255 from West Forsyth High School. His brother played at Georgia. South Carolina likes him as a defensive tackle. Travian Robertson has been working hard. This is a 4-star guy. He will visit the Gamecocks on May the 30th. Then he will visit Georgia on June the 6th and Ohio State 6th on June 13th. So really no competition here. Just the defending national champions and Kirby Smart with the best football program in the country. And this whole list kind of looks a lot like that.
Yeah, no big challenges on there.
So, look, Georgia's got about 16 defensive tackles on scholarship that were all ranked just as high or higher than, more highly rated than this guy. Does Travian Robertson have a shot here?
Yeah, just to start with him, I think it could be one of those two where they get him, if they are able to get him, they get him in the program and kind of go from there to figure out what position he feels or fits best at. Is that offensive line or defensive line? And it's really interesting though, because when you look at it, he's listed at 6'5", 255, and you kind of see pictures of him and you wonder, is the frame there for him to play on the offensive line? Can he get much bigger? And I kind of wonder myself if defensive tackle or working with Travian Robinson is the best route if they were to get him. But the key in the recruitment is Georgia's going to be that's going to be one of the top challenges. And you mentioned those other schools, but obviously he's got some connections to Georgia with I think it's maybe a half brother or a brother that's played on the Georgia roster. And so, I mean, that's going to be a challenge to, see if they can pry him away. But he visited right before the spring game. I think it was that Thursday or Friday right before the spring game. And, so that was big to go ahead and get him in for an unofficial visit in the spring. It obviously shows there's legit interest there. And now you get him in on the official visit and see, what can happen. And that's, I think that's going to be the case with a lot of these guys that are coming in that weekend.
All right, so currently there's 8 guys scheduled. We're not going to go through every single guy because we won't have time, but we're going to highlight some of the guys from each weekend. You can't not mention Carter Meadows, who by some is a 5-star defensive end. He's out of Gonzaga High School in Washington, D.C., 6'6", 225. He will be in that first weekend. He visited in the spring. Was kind of a shocker when he showed up. A lot of people didn't think South Carolina was in it. And his other visits are Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State. And so South Carolina is kind of the outlier because you got 3 traditional Big Ten powerhouses, and then you have South Carolina from the SEC, but Sterling Lucas is a stud recruiter. I mean, probably the best defensive line recruiter South Carolina has had other than Brad Lawing. And you just can't count him out in the DMV. I mean, what are your thoughts on Carter Meadows?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think maybe probably about 2 months or so ago, he, was doing an interview and I think mentioned South Carolina. That was kind of the first mention you heard of South Carolina being involved with Carter Meadows. But he's one where it's huge to get him in for that official visit, but they got him in for the spring game as well. And that was I think a multi-day visit that he was in around that spring game. And that showed legit interest. And I think that was big for them. Kind of same thing I was mentioning Pierre Dean, to get him in, not only for the official, but get him in for, a day or two around that spring game. And, as you mentioned, Sterling Lucas that he's been a heck of a recruiter for South Carolina since he got to South Carolina. And South Carolina's got a lot to sell at that position. I mean, for one, you got to sell Dylan Stewart, and specifically to Carter Meadows. He's from that same area, that Washington, D.C. area. And so I think there's a lot to sell there with what they were able to do with Dylan Stewart as a freshman, being in coming from that same area as well. And then also what South Carolina was able to do with Kyle Kennard, a guy that, maybe was on a little bit of the draft radar coming from Georgia Tech to South Carolina, but then really just exploded. And he was very open, throughout his time at South Carolina, even after, about the impact Sterling Lucas made on his game. And I think there's just a whole lot to sell for defensive end prospects, edge prospects for South Carolina right now. And they're going to sell all that to Carter Meadows. And obviously that, it's kind of the same thing with Pierre Dean as well. There's a lot of, schools coming after him. You got Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State, and that's schools that are kind of all up in that, north or northeast area, obviously. And so, we'll see, but, South Carolina's going to have its shot next weekend. And obviously, as I mentioned, there's a lot to sell at that position right now.
All right, staying in the DMV, Corey Adams from Towson, Maryland, a big-time corner, considered the number 3 corner in the country, the number 36 player nationally by the 24/7 Sports Composite, 6'2", 175, just like Torian Gray likes them long, lean, can twist their hips, and have great recovery speed. So he will visit the Gamecocks on May the 30th. He's already visited Penn State. Last weekend, May the 16th, he'll visit Notre Dame on June the 13th, and then he'll head out to Nike headquarters with Phil Knight and the crew, and the Quack Attack, the Ducks, on June the 20th. But another guy in the DMV, Torian Gray and Sterling Lucas, probably double teaming this guy with Clayton White and Shane Beamer leading the way. You can never count Torian Gray out with elite corners.
Right, and with cornerbacks, he's got the frame that Torian Gray looks for, that 6'2", 175, and that's what we've seen from Torian Gray, especially in these recent classes. That's kind of the exact frame at that cornerback position that they're looking for. And the first guy that we've talked about so far that it's not going to be their first official visit for. So obviously, as you mentioned, he's been to Penn State already, and I think Notre Dame could end up being a team to watch in this one. But a guy that's, there's obviously interest there for him to schedule an official visit. And there's been, a lot, I think, some interest there for some time now between these two parties. And we'll see, I think it's going to be, a lot's going to have to go to, be able to get Kari Adams to come to, down south just because of the, teams like Notre Dame and, Penn State especially. And then Oregon gets that last official visit. But obviously having a guy who's, a high 4-star guy, number 3 cornerback in the country, like, South Carolina's got some things to sell there at cornerback as well. So, I feel like I keep saying it with this first official visit weekend group, but you get these guys in and you just see where you can go and see what can happen.
No doubt. All right, so we can't talk about everybody. I think wide receiver recruiting is going to be tough this year because Carolina signed 6 really blue chip wide receivers. Travis Johnson, 6'3", 185, a 4-star guy from the 757 there in Chesapeake, Virginia. He has already visited Indiana on May the 2nd. He visits South Carolina on the 30th, Penn State, Michigan, and Virginia Tech the next 3 weekends. Mike Furry, it's hard to count him out, but a lot of schools are going to be using those 6 freshmen against the Gamecocks.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how this wide receiver class ends up because, once they, as you mentioned, signed 6 of those wide receivers in his last class, just to see just how it all turns out. But, they're going to have their shot with Travis Johnson this weekend, another guy that's up in that Virginia area, a guy that's, I think, in Chesapeake, Virginia, and he's got some other visits, but South Carolina's been in this one for a little while, and they've got a few other guys they're going to have in as well. I think Ryan Mosley's a guy that could very well end up being a South Carolina versus Georgia battle for that guy coming out of Carrollton, Georgia, and Georgia could end up being tough to beat, but they're right there in the battle with him. And then you got Samori and Wingo coming in. I think that last weekend, the guy that South Carolina's also been involved with, and it seems like wide receivers a position that guys always kind of pop up in the summer as well. That some guys who may be under the radar, maybe a guy that comes to camp and impresses, but South Carolina's in a great spot at that wide receiver room. And I think after signing 6, anything that you can get in that wide receiver room in this next class is just kind of, I guess you could say, icing on the cake a little bit, just because you're in such a good spot from a freshman and really an overall depth spot. Because you got Mazio Bennett, who's a sophomore. You got other guy, and Nick Harbor's obviously still got some eligibility left after this year as well. So they're in a great spot at wide receiver room, and anything you can add in that room this class would add on pretty much.
As does Vandrevis Jacobs, a guy I don't think gets talked about enough. I think he's one of my breakout candidates this year. All right, so quickly, 2 more guys I'm very intrigued by. Offensive tackle J.B. Shabazz. He's going to be on my all-name team. 6'7", 295 from Kernersville, Georgia. Gamecocks get the first visit. UNC and Jordan Belichick up next. Then Auburn and Hugh Freeze on the Plains, and then Ohio State on the 20th. I think this is a guy Lonnie Teasley's really worked and got a great relationship with. And then KJ Johnson, kind of a guy that's been under the radar, DB out of Birmingham, Alabama, 6'2", 175. At least according to 24/7 Sports, South Carolina is his only official visit right now. But look, you can go to DQ Smith, Nick Emanwari, and Judge Collier. None of those guys had any offers, and all they did was wind up playing as true freshmen, and in the case of Emanwari and DQ Smith, starting in like the second or first game of their career.
Yeah, starting with him, like he's really interesting. Like he's one that's kind of jumped up on the radar here recently, and I think it's a South Carolina Ole Miss battle for him, and it's going to be that way down the stretch. And he's one that you mentioned we talked about with Corey Adams. South Carolina's done pretty well recruiting those high level cornerbacks, but Torian Gray's also done a pretty incredible job of going out and finding guys who not a lot of people know about. You mentioned a guy like Judge Collier who was a little bit under recruited coming out of high school, but they found him, and obviously they're a little bit of a help that he was in state. But and then Nick Worry as well, and DQ Smith. But they've done an incredible job of finding these defensive backs and these secondary guys who are kind of under the radar and turn up after a year or two, are guys who are playing like a Judge Collier or those other guys mentioned. So I'm not 100% sure if he has a Ole Miss official visit schedule. I know obviously on his profile it's not there yet, but he's coming in next weekend, and South Carolina's going to have his shot. And then with JB Shabazz, the first time I saw him was at a camp last year, a South Carolina camp, and was pretty impressed with him. And I think that interest has continued. And didn't hear a whole lot about him in South Carolina for a little while there, but then official visit was scheduled, and so we'll see. That's another guy that South Carolina's after on that offensive line, and they're going to have a few Michael Smiths coming in as well that weekend as well. So they're going to have a whole bunch of offensive linemen in that class, and because obviously I think they want to add a few just from a numbers standpoint.
All right, give me one guy that weekend that you are really going to be like intrigued to hear what comes out of the visit, or you think South Carolina can really make a major move with.
KJ Johnson could be one. That's one I'm interested to hear how the official visit goes. But I think one would be the one that I'm really interested in, outside of Carter Meadows, because I think that's going to be one that everybody wants to hear about just because of being, one of the top defensive ends in the country. But Pierre Dean is one that, I think there a lot of talk is around that Georgia connection, but I think South Carolina's really, in it with him, and the official visit is going to be big. So I'm really interested to see how the official visit goes. Is there more talk about what side of the ball he wants to play, or that South Carolina wants him to play? So I think he's really one of the more intriguing prospects that's coming in that weekend, just from a recruitment standpoint, but then just a position standpoint as well.
All right, so the next weekend, 10 official visitors, highlighted by the Harris twins, Aiden and Andrew Harris, who will both visit Penn State on May 30th, South Carolina June the 6th, Auburn on June the 13th, and NC State on the 20th. I kind of think South Carolina is really in great shape with Aiden and Andrew Harris. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. South Carolina, it's kind of interesting, their recruitment. Like, I think South Carolina was, recruiting them, and then there, didn't seem to be, much just attention being paid to South Carolina. But really, in this past 2 months or so, South Carolina's really surged in this recruitment. And, I think South Carolina and NC State are the two that you can see towards the top of their recruitment. But, South Carolina's put themselves in a great spot. And I remember talking to Aiden Harris at I think it was the Charlotte camp, the Charlotte Under Armour camp, and he kind of just raved about Sterling Lucas and Travion Robertson and the South Carolina coaching staff. So for both of those guys, I think South Carolina's put themselves in a great spot. And from an instant standpoint, with Andrew Harris, does he end up being more of a defensive tackle, or do they kind of recruit him more as a linebacker as well? Because I think you can see that as well. So I think Aiden, you're going to see him at defensive tackle wherever he goes, but Andrew Harris is going to be the interesting one. And overall, I think South Carolina's put themselves in a really good spot for both of those guys.
All right, so just named to the Elite 11, Landon Duckworth will be in town, as will be four-star Durham defensive tackle Noah Clark. Your thoughts on those two guys?
Yeah, it was big for South Carolina to get Duckworth in for an unofficial in the spring. He came to, I can't remember which scrimmage it was, but one of the scrimmages, and they had to get him in, you think, for their chances to increase to get him. And, it could very well end up being a South Carolina Ole Miss battle for him. And, but I think also you have to watch Auburn. Auburn's kind of come onto the radar a little bit here lately, and he's going to have an official visit there. But, I think, Ole Miss could be, I'm not going to say they're the leader right now, but it's definitely Ole Miss is towards the top in that recruitment, and South Carolina's there as well. I think a lot of times people are thinking, oh, he decommitted from South Carolina. You don't, because overall you don't see a whole lot of guys who decommit go back to the school that, or commit back to the school that he committed from, but you just don't see it happen a lot. But there's legit interest on both sides here from a Duckworth and South Carolina standpoint. And, I think he's continued to build a good relationship with Mike Shula, and he's already had the relationship with Shane Beamer. So, it's going to be interesting. That's a big official visit. And, we'll see just from a quarterback standpoint. Obviously, they had Brady Smeagol on their radar, but he has now committed to Michigan a few weeks ago. So, quarterback's going to be an interesting spot in that class. And Duckworth, I think they're kind of really going all in for to see what they can do.
All right, thoughts on Noah Clark, who has already visited UVA on the 25th. He will leave South Carolina and go to Notre Dame on June the 10th, Virginia Tech on the 14th, and then NC State on June the 20th. I think the Gamecocks are in good shape with him as well.
Yeah, I think so as well. And you don't want to count out Notre Dame because I think they're recruiting so well, really, on that defensive line. You don't want to count them out. But also, I think it could be the same with the Harris twins at NC State. It may be South Carolina and NC State as the two top competitions right now for that recruitment. But defensive line is such an important recruitment overall in this class, just because from a numbers standpoint, they need to continue adding there. And if they're able to add Aiden Harris and Noah Clark, two of the top defensive linemen in the country, and really for one in that I think they want to continue to do well in the state of North Carolina. If you get those two guys along with some of these other guys that are recruiting, that'd be big. But I think Noah Clark, that they've put themselves in a good spot. Travion Robinson, I think they've built a good relationship there, and that's going. I keep saying it, but the official visit is going to be big in this one, and we'll see. Obviously, Virginia Tech is in there as well, but I can really see it coming down to South Carolina, NC State.
All right, so there are others we touched. You touched on Ryan Mosley, another offensive tackle. Kamari Blair is visiting 6'6", 280 from Clarksville, Tennessee. But two guys I'm intrigued by, Keenan Britt, the Gamecock commitment, also visits that weekend, along with Zion Giles, a big offensive lineman from Carver's Bay, who's committed to Carolina. But two DBs, Joel Combe, safety out of Kell High School in Marietta, and then Koski Barnes from Greensboro Grimsley, another big, long corner, 6'3", 190. What about those two guys? I think South Carolina may be in the driver's seat for Combe. I don't know about Barnes. Your thoughts?
Yeah, starting with Barnes, he was one that I think it was probably about maybe we're getting around a month or so ago. He came on the radar, and it wasn't really a guy I was tracking too much. But then you started looking at his measurables at 6'3", 190. And he goes back to what we talked about. That fits kind of perfectly for what they look for, Torian Gray looked for in a cornerback. But he's kind of come onto the radar for a lot of schools lately. Obviously, he's got Louisville and Kentucky official visits as well. But, South Carolina normally does really well with these type of guys, and I think that's kind of a big selling point for Torian Gray. And so we'll see what they can do. But, I think South Carolina could be in a pretty good spot for him. And then with Joel Combe, he's another one that's kind of in the same as with Koshi Barnes, just kind of emerging late. But, I'm interested to see where his ranking ends up, just because I think he's going to continue to rise just from some of these schools that are coming after him. Like I think he was at Georgia maybe this past weekend, and but I think just with him, I think one is just can they get him in, because I'm not sure how many times he's visited before, but I mean they've done a pretty good job in that recruitment so far, and they're going to have to battle Missouri, who he's going to that first weekend, Wisconsin June 13th, and Tennessee as well. But being a guy that's from Marietta, Georgia, and Kell High School, that obviously maybe keep an eye on Georgia to see how much they become a factor. But South Carolina got in a little bit early with this one, I think, as well, and they're making a run at it.
All right, so the last weekend, by the way, according to On3 Sports, FSU running back commit Amari Thomas will visit South Carolina on May the 30th. He's 5'10", 180. Also that weekend, 4-star running back from Langston Hughes High School, same school as Prentice Nolan. He will visit, but really you got to talk about Jazavian Currents, the the Gamecock commit is in, and one of his best friends, Samari Matthews from Huff High School in Cornelius, one of the top corners in the country, he will visit. So will Darius Gray, who's considered the #1 interior offensive lineman in the country out of Richmond, Virginia. Your thoughts on Gray and Matthews?
Yeah, Darius Gray, he's got a ton of official visits scheduled, but South Carolina's been on Darius Gray for a long time. Like they've been a factor and maybe even towards the top of this recruitment for a long time. And he's visited so many times. And I think the key for South Carolina and Darius Gray is to get Darius Gray in on that June 20th weekend, because he's got some of those official visits. Obviously, I think he's going. I think maybe the school to watch right now, as well as South Carolina, as LSU. And I think keep an eye on those guys. But he's got so many official visits. And I think just the key is, if you get him into that June 20th official visit weekend, I think you have to like South Carolina's chances to be able to pull that one off. But he's going to be, obviously he is the top interior offensive lineman in the country by 24/7 Sports and a 5-star guy. And that would be a huge pull just from being able to go and get that type of player from the state of Virginia, because South Carolina, that's one of their important states when they look for recruiting. You've seen that in this past cycles. And just because I think, those Virginia kids, they want to attract SEC talent there, and he could be the next one of those. And same thing kind of with Samari Matthews. When you think about South Carolina these past few cycles, this June 20th weekend, or that last official visit weekend, has really been the one that they've kind of built it around to be that big weekend for them. And you can really see it with a lot of these guys, and Samari Matthews is that one too. And he's another one that they've been recruiting for a long time now. And he's one that, he's got a lot, being that I remember seeing him in Charlotte, and you can just see why he's ranked as high as he is, because he's really good and, again, fits what they want for in the secondary. And he and Jazavian Currents are really close. They play on the same 7-on-7 type of team, and they're really, really close. I talked to both of those guys in Charlotte about that. And, I think Jazavian's doing what he can to recruit him to South Carolina. And, I think, maybe keep an eye on Texas as well in this recruitment as well. Texas kind of come in late, and but he's going to have a lot of suitors, and it can end up being a big weekend overall for South Carolina. And not to jump ahead, but you got Carson Baker as well, who's been one of their top overall targets, the running back out of Langston Hughes, and Tamarian Watkins, a safety from from in-state that they really built a relationship with and seem to be in a pretty good spot. So it can end up being a big weekend, especially from an in-state perspective. And then you got those other guys, those highly ranked guys, and Samari Matthews and Darius Gray, who they're doing a pretty good job with so far.
All right, no doubt. All right, so wide receiver Samarian Wingo out of St. Augustine, Florida. He will visit Florida, Miami, and Alabama. That's going to be a big pull, but I really wanted to get your take. There are 4 in-state kids that are coming in that last official visit weekend. Safety Tamarian Watkins from Rock Hill, Desmond Green, the big offensive lineman from Timberland High School, 6'5", 354, Georgia is in that one. Trey Aiken from Clinton, and then tight end Tilden Riley out of Orangeburg Prep, 6'5", 215, a guy that Sean Elliott really likes. Can the Gamecocks go 4 for 4 here?
They've got a pretty good shot. I think you like where they stand with Tamarian Watkins. You really like where they stand with Tilden Riley. I think they put themselves in a good spot for both of those guys. And it's going to be the 2 linemen that's going to be, they're going to have to finish out those recruitments. But, I think with Desmond Green, Georgia, you mentioned with him, but also keep an eye on Oklahoma in this recruitment. They've kind of, made a name for themselves in this recruitment, and you just keep an eye on those guys. But it could have very well for Desmond Green end up being a Georgia-South Carolina battle. And, if they're able to get him into that June 20th weekend like they're planning to, it could be big just because that could be his last official visit. And then with Trey Aiken as well, South Carolina's been recruiting him for a while, but the team to really keep an eye on is Georgia Tech. And this one, I think it could be in a South Carolina Georgia Tech battle for him. But, again, you are able to get this last official visit weekend. They make it, being that it's such a big weekend, you get all these guys in there, you have your shot, and then you can have the last say before. I'm not sure where commitment timelines for some of these guys if they're going to wait till after the visits. I know Tilden Riley's going to wait till after all the official visits. When I talked to him last week, that's what he told me. But you get these guys in, you have your shot, and you're going to have maybe the last say for some of these guys as well.
All right, Alex, great stuff. As always, give me one guy from that June 20th weekend that you are really going to be intrigued to see how they come out of that official visit.
I'll go with Carson Baker. I think South Carolina, he's got, a bunch of teams, Ohio State, Georgia, who are really recruiting him hard. And, I think, it's kind of bounced around who's been the leader in those recruitments. But, Carson Baker's been a guy who's maybe even been one of their not only top running back recruit, but top overall recruits. I think Markel Blackwell's really kind of zeroed in on him as, the running back in this class. And it's going to be a challenge because you got to, Ohio State, Texas A&M is in there as well, and Georgia. But, South Carolina, you get him on that official visit, that's going to be key. And I'm really interested to see just what, we'll see. Obviously, it's going to be a big few weeks for him just for that official visit weekend. But that's really an interesting recruit for South Carolina. They've been recruiting for a long time here.
Alex, man, I feel like I just had a big porterhouse steak, twice baked potato with some asparagus, and then I just had like bananas Foster for dessert. Man, that is red meat on recruiting. A deep dive. Thanks so much for being with us. Rest up, my friend. The summer of Shane is right around the corner, and we'll be looking forward to checking back with you as we get into these official visits.
Looking forward to it. See you next time.
All right. That was Alex Jones from the Big Spur. We now go to the great state of Rhode Island. Newport, Rhode Island, maybe one of the 2 or 3 most beautiful places I've ever been. But our resident Boston sports expert and Gamecock expert, formerly, how many Emmys have you won? Can you even count them? Is it 3 sports Emmys for Mike Uva? Is that correct?
It's 2, Keith. It's not going up anytime soon, but we're all right. Appreciate the shout out.
You got ripped off of the 3rd one. That's what it was. So how is life on the East Coast? I'm jealous because of the lobster rolls, the Atlantic oysters, all the seafood up there, and it should be a beautiful time of the year up there where you are. So how's life treating you, my friend? Congratulations on the upcoming nuptials. Have you set a date for the wedding?
Still working through that right now, but as many people who have gone through planning weddings know, it's just a ball of fun, let me tell you. No, she's been great about it, but it's just a pain in the neck putting every little detail together. But there'll be some Southern wedding things that we do. We're going to do, like a buffet style. We're not going to do the sit down. So that saves you the trouble of having to figure out a seating arrangement. So we're going to be able to save some things here and there. We'll have some northernness to it as well. That was one thing we have to make sure we have pasta in some shape, way, or form. The Italians would be very upset if that doesn't happen. So going through all the details though, but no, I appreciate that. And yeah, the weather, I mean, this is the time of the year that you want to be up here. I mean, I was actually talking to another friend of mine from Columbia, or I should say actually the Charleston area, but he goes back and forth everywhere, and they're looking at, potentially getting another home up here because they just love the weather up in New England at this time of the year. You can't beat it. I mean, I don't need to tell you, even being in Texas, but Columbia, of course, famously hot. Once you get to the summer, once you get to even this point, right, in May, middle of spring, it is just a toaster oven down there. So this is the time of the year that you want to be up here, but you have to deal with the cold and the snow and all that other stuff, another 3-4 months of the year. But we're finally here, though, Keith. We finally did it.
Yeah, 104 degrees here.
Yeah. I don't know if you got me, Keith, going in and out.
It is. Hang on one second. Let me see if I can do something about that. Hang in with me. All right. Is that any better? Can you hear me?
Yep, I got you, Keith.
Mike?
Yep. I got you.
Mike, can you hear me? All right, we're back.
Clear.
All right, so is the wedding going to be in Columbia or in Boston?
We're looking in South Carolina, looking at parts of South Carolina. We'll leave it at that.
By the water.
I'll tell you what, though, man, you think it's cheaper down there, and certainly there are parts that are cheaper. But, if you want to do it out towards Charleston, I don't need to tell anyone because they already know it's expensive down there, too, because it's a destination that a lot of people want to go to, not just people that are from the state of South Carolina. But, yeah, we're working through it one day at a time, but hopefully we'll be able to get something, cemented down in the near future for next year.
All right, so I know we're upset about our Celtics. Jason Tatum ruptured Achilles. Jaylen Brown, partially torn meniscus. I know something about that. But really, the big story, even though he's not in Boston or Foxborough anymore, is Mr. Jordan Hudson. I'm talking about Bill Belichick. He's 73. She's 24. What could possibly go wrong with that? What are your thoughts on the Jordan situation?
I'm sure if I had a daughter, I would probably feel differently. Put it this way, good for Bill in that sense. They're both adults. Is it a little odd? Certainly. Right. I mean, you try to figure out all right, what the heck do they talk about? What do they have in common? But I think the thing to me is if these rumors that started to come out on Tuesday are true, that they're going to get married. Again, nothing has been official. I mean, we've seen certain things on social media over the last couple of days. Any rumor can become a thing, and then don't even get me started on some of the things. But the point being is, we'll wait and see how it plays out. But yeah, very interesting to say the least. And I think you hear everyone has an opinion on it, but I feel like the thing that stood out to me the most, two things. One, Julian Edelman and Rob Gronkowski. They do a podcast together. I think it's called Dudes on Dudes, dudes talking about dudes. And one day they're talking about, hey, everything's fine. Like, let them be. And then a couple days later, Julian Edelman is on Colin Cowherd's show, and he kind of changed his tune a little bit. It was like, this is, a little concerning. And again, I'm paraphrasing here. And then you hear Charles Barkley on the Dan Patrick show saying, you know what, I'm kind of concerned. I might reach out. So those are people that are close to him. I'm not saying they talk to him every single day, but when you have people like that in his circle, I'm not going to say inner circle, but in his circle that are concerned, you're seeing the wife's, I'm going to say allegedly, because you never know who's posting these days. Want to make sure you but the wives of some of Belichick's sons responding on social media, again, allegedly, that draws a red flag as well. So bottom line is I hope Bill's all right. You know, you don't want to jump to conclusions, but you hope Bill's, all there. And he's able to do what he's been able to do his entire life, whether you're a Tar Heel fan or not. I want to see what he can do from a college standpoint. I mean, he brought so much joy to New England for, 20 plus years. It would be a hell of a story for him to go down there and win. And as you know, Keith, all right, if they go out there and they win, all this stuff with Jordan off the field, people are going to forget about that real quick. If he starts to lose, though, oh, man, you have not seen – this is just the tip of the iceberg of the Jordan Hudson story, or the Jordan, I guess is how you pronounce it. I don't know. Jordan, whatever. Potato.
All right, so Lulu Kesson, who's a beat writer from the Greenville News, who is a Massachusetts native and worked for Bill Simmons at the Ringer. Her boyfriend went to high school with Jordan. It's kind of like Joe Theismann changed his pronunciation of his name to Theismann for Heisman when he was at Notre Dame. Maybe she's changing the pronunciation, but in high school she was Jordan.
Hey,
at least according to his boyfriend, who. Yeah, I mean,
you're trying to add a little extra flavor to it, right? Make it sound more sophisticated.
I think there's more flavor than Belichick is going to be able to handle. I think if they do get married, he probably needs to have food tasters prior to every meal, and we'll see if he can survive the honeymoon.
The thing that's the most interesting part about it all, Keith, and again, as someone that lived on the edge of watching Belichick press conferences, having covered him for the 2022 season and dealing with him and how he goes about things in the media. I've had conversations with Will Muschamp in the past, not about this, about Belichick. I'd say, within the last 2 or 3 years, I've talked to Will a couple times about it. And the thing about it is, because he knows him well, the thing about it is Bill was so good. He was the master of not letting distractions, not letting the outside noise become the story. And I think that's the thing that I take away the most from it all. His right-hand man is working at Boston College now with Bill O'Brien. So he dealt with a lot of his PR stuff for many, many years. And if Jordan is taking on that role of his PR person, all right, that's one thing. But when you let it impact what's going on in other aspects of your life and it's becoming the story, you wonder. Well, I mean, I can make some assumptions as to why it's got as crazy as it has and why he hasn't told her to kind of just keep her mouth shut. I think we can all put 2 and 2 together why and how some things can take over from a power standpoint and make you think differently. We'll just leave it at that. So I think more than anything is it has surprised me how much this has become a story for a guy who was so damn good of keeping the distractions to the side. If this becomes a problem during the season, that will be something that I'm very interested in paying attention to. And another thing, Keith, if you were a gambling man, and granted, I would have asked you this before the speculation came out yesterday, but I'll still go with it. What happens first? Or what will last longer, I should say? Bill Belichick's tenure at North Carolina or his relationship with Jordan moving forward?
I think those are both in the NFL, and that is not for long.
Well done.
There's speculation. I guess not. She was banned from North Carolina football facilities, and talk got out that Belichick may just go ahead and wait until June the 1st and write North Carolina a check for $1 million and say peace out, and then all of a sudden. I think Bubba Cunningham or somebody said, oh, no, that's not true. Jordan has not been banned from the football facility. So it looks like the season, Belichick will make it at least to the start of the season. We'll see how long it goes. I could see him if it doesn't go well early, be like, well, shoot.
I see him. I see him giving it a shot. I see him giving it a shot at least for one season. I can't see him walking away, even though, to your point, I think it's June 1st that buyout drops from like $10 million to $1 million. I will say this, though. The guy that has been on top of this story for the last couple of weeks, Pablo Torre, this isn't just some jabroni off the street who will make stuff up for clicks. He's really friggin' good. I mean, I remember watching him for many years over on ESPN. He writes very well. He's an intelligent person. He went to Harvard too. So this isn't a guy that just says stuff. There'll be reporters this is a guy that if he's putting something out, I'm listening. I'm listening because he wouldn't just say, okay, because Keith, this is what always makes me laugh because I've been in situations like this, not to this level. Trying to make sure I don't give any names out. I was actually on another show yesterday that will be coming out next week. Excited about that. Maybe I'll plug it here. Well, I'll let them share, but I'm excited. It's a popular show.
Dude, go ahead. We're happy to promote you. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know if they want to promote it yet, so I want to make sure. I'll put it off to the side. I'll let them share it. So I'm excited to be on that show. I think it's coming out next week, but Gamecock fans, they know these two individuals. We'll just leave it at that. So I think the big thing is with these situations, you have the school that will come out. They'll see a report, and the school will come out, and they want to control the narrative. That's where it comes down to. They want to control the narrative. As a reporter, I've been on the other side of that. When you know for damn sure what the hell's going on, you've been told from people inside the building sometimes. But because the school wants to have full control of the narrative, they will come out and they will issue a statement. An athletic director, a coach, especially with Twitter these days, it's so much easier. You can just go put it. And by doing that, you'll see a portion of a fan base. You'll see a portion of people that are reading that, and they'll be just like, oh, that reporter just made that up. The reporter just made that up. When in reality, all that's happening is they're just trying to control the narrative. They don't want that to get out there. They'll put a spin on it in some capacity. I've been in a situation where I put a report out a couple of years ago. It wasn't for football. I'll leave it at that. And I had a phone call. I received a phone call later that evening from someone extremely high up. I think people are smart enough to put that 2 and 2 together. And they were not happy about something that I put out. That individual put something out on social media, basically trying to, show another side of what was going on. Next day, the coach, some of the players text me saying, thank you for doing what you did. Thank you. So I get it. I understand. I don't think Belichick's going to be texting Pablo Torre in this case, but my point being is, just because a school comes out and says something or an athlete says, oh, that's not the case. I mean, shoot, look at what happened with the Tennessee situation. Not apples to apples, right? With the Nico story. Father comes out, Pete Nokas, he's making this up. And then what happens 24, 48 hours later? We found out that Pete was right on it. So just a little added nugget to that whole story that, I would pay very close attention to what Pablo Torre has to say with this, because it feels like it's almost like he's a sports reporter, but on top of it, he's like a lifestyle reporter right now, Keith.
There's no doubt about it. When Pablo Torre speaks, I listen. He's the one that put that out that, there was the potential for Bill Belichick because of the Jordan being banned from the facilities on June the 1st, just writing them $1 million, saying peace out. All right, so let's talk about the Gamecocks. I went on the record last night after South Carolina lost to Florida 11-3. They're 28-29. They were 6-25 versus SEC opponents. Paul Maneri went from this confident guy who had a 1-year plan and had plenty of good players and full confidence to a guy at the end of the season that shifted all the blame to the players. Basically rolling them under the bus. I think the pasta and the Mainieri sauce is gone bad. I don't think you can save it. There's such a level of toxicity inside that program. You probably have heard a lot of the same stuff. I just don't see with him saying Terry Rooney is here to stay. He's a great coach. He's a great recruiter. He's here to stay. He's the biggest part of the problem. There is a toxic environment. I don't see how you can recruit and bring players in. I mean, they spent 4 times as much money for this team as they did the year before, when if it hadn't been for injuries, they could have been a top 8 national seed. And Mike, you know this as well as I do. When there is a good culture in a program, like with Shane Beamer, like with Dawn Staley, like with what I can only imagine, South Carolina softball is building there. They know those coaches have their backs. They'll run through the wall for them. The players will run through the wall for each other, for the program, because they have the culture, the brotherhood or the sisterhood. Ashley Chastain Woodard in her first year, I still don't know how she's not SEC Coach of the Year. Hell, she could end up being the National Coach of the Year. But with Mainieri in baseball, it's the exact opposite. I mean, if you keep him, you could be looking at a worse situation next year.
So my initial thoughts on the whole situation, because I've had some conversations with people over the last couple of days, and let's break this down this way, because I try to make sense of these things. We can just get the pitchforks out, get the fire, get upset, rabble. We can do that all we want. That's not going to achieve anything. So let's try to make sense of it. Paul Mainieri is a hell of a coach, plain and simple. I mean, you don't go to 2 college boards. Listen, you. I'm talking to Gamecock Nation, because let's just make sense of it. He's a hell of a coach. You don't just forget how to coach overnight. Now, having said that, he was away from the game for 3 years. He's inheriting a program that a year ago, and for years leading up to, this very fan base wanted the previous head coach fired. Okay? Now, what took place from the end of last season to this season? Yes, you did have some pieces come back, but you did lose a lot of talent. And then down the stretch, obviously, Ethan Petrie, not saying that made a difference, because he was healthy for the majority of the season. It didn't make a difference. What I'm trying to get at is this. What you see in 1 year, I don't think you can base on that. Like, what are you going to do? Continue to do this cycle? Never mind the financial part of it, which I do want to get into, because that plays a key part. And there's other factors that are going on right now at South Carolina that are much bigger than baseball, but you have to take baseball into account because it impacts it as well. When you look at what happened with Lamont Paris his first year, a lot of people said the same stuff. Go back. I can find tweets for you. I can find stories. Lamont Paris lost the locker room. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's in over his head. Blah, blah, blah. Again, not apples to apples. What did Lamont do? Lamont was able to build his team that following year. And he was able to get him back to the NCAA tournament. Not only that, but they tied the program record for wins. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen with baseball. But I do believe that in this era, especially when players enter the portal, and that was always the case, but when players can enter the portal at any given time, maybe there was some disconnect. Maybe Mainieri did walk into it thinking that it was going to be a little bit easier than he expected. And I know he said certain things down the stretch that, it makes you wonder, like, Paul, why are you saying that? But ultimately, like we were saying with Bill Belichick, when you can win games, that will cure everything. That will heal everything. So in my opinion, you can't just keep pressing the reset button every year. And I don't like the comparison. I'm not saying you said this, Keith, but I see some people on social media say, I see it on the message board, oh, look what Ashley was able to do with the softball team. Look, it's not the same thing. It's not the same friggin' sport. It's not. I'm sorry. Softball is very talented. It's a very talented conference. But when you look at baseball in the SEC, it's you cannot compare the two. I'm sorry, you can't compare the two. So just to assume, that's like saying like, oh, look what Don Staley's been able to do in women's basketball. Why can't we do that in men's basketball? Stop it. We all know that's not the same. That's not taking anything away from Ashley. That's not taking anything away from Don. But that's just the reality of it. If Mainieri does come back next year, which I think a lot of us expect at this point, and they're not able to take that next step, in my opinion, yeah, you got to move on. Now, why wait another year? Well, there's some factors. I want to, give you a chance to rebuttal, Keith. But there are some things outside of just the performance factor. It's what's going on right now with the NIL cap. And I know some fans don't want to hear it, but the reality is we're not living in monopoly land. There's $20.5 million that you have to try to make up. And it's not just going to impact you for one sport. It's going to impact you for every sport. And that's just the reality of where we're at. And for South Carolina, I can tell you right now, behind the scenes, they've been doing little things over the last couple of months to cut the fat off so they can make damn sure that they get that money. And this is a new era that we're in right now, this upcoming summer. They have to go through this first year. And once they can figure out, okay, how can we get to 20.5? Moving forward, it should be easier. It's a tough spot you're in right now. So that's what I would tell the Gamecock fans, not just from a performance standpoint, but from a buyout standpoint. Oh, well, you can just buy them out. Oh, that's great. But think of that money now that you're losing from an NIL standpoint that could impact you, not just from baseball, but for basketball, for football. And then we sit back here and we wonder a couple months from now, damn, why can't we compete in football? Why can't we compete in basketball? Why can't we? Because you don't have the money. That's why.
So I agree with that. So I will say it's not the same because Paul Mainieri was not coaching. He was not able to bring 4 of his best players from a great mid-major program. But softball in the SEC is just as tough as baseball in the SEC. Mike, 14 teams from the SEC made the NCAA tournament. And many of them are still alive in the super regional. And I think you'll have 4 or 5 SEC teams probably in the College World Series. And so I think what Ashley Chastain Woodard did is remarkable. Yes, she brought players from Charlotte. She also plucked one from Charleston Southern. She plucked one off the end of the bench who couldn't get on the field at Oklahoma, who hit 373 and was a middle infielder who started in center field every game, Quincy Lilio. I mean, it's hard when you've been out of the sport for 3 years, name, image, and likeness is ramped up. Terry Rooney really had not been on the field. Quite frankly, he's a big part of the problem. But it's not just that. It's Mainieri and Rooney are running everything. Other members of the coaching staff, they don't even know who the starting lineup's going to be until it's posted. And it's toxic. I agree with you. You can't afford to pay him $7 million, but maybe you can reach some kind of settlement, because I just don't think, as toxic as the environment is, yeah, you can keep him for the money and you can go through another season and finish 15th in the league. And then you're going to have to hire an icon like Dawn Staley, to somebody who's got to basically the phoenix be resurrected from the ashes, because he's going to burn the program to the ground. It's not going to be better next year.
I think it's already
no chance, no way, no how with Terry Rooney and Paul Mainieri in that program. Players are not going to come because they are not building a culture that promotes winning and success. They're just not.
I don't want to put the tinfoil hat on, but I like a good conspiracy. Is it possible that Mainieri's trying to run guys out? You want to be part of this program? Great. If not, I'm going to get the guys that I want in here. I'm not saying they're all going to flock the way that maybe he envisions it, but I do think towards the end, if there is some type of, and I don't like to use these words lightly, But again, based on some of the things we're hearing, and it's difficult for me to be able to say some of these things because I'm not down there every day, but I'm going based off of my conversations with people in the building as well as some of my colleagues. But if there is some type of mutiny going on in that locker room, you need to be able to have guys that buy into the system. And I'm not taking it off the plate of Maneri by any means. It starts with him. There's no question. There's no question. It starts with him. It trickles down to Rooney. It trickles down to Monty Lee. It trickles down to the coaching staff, of course, and then it gets to the players. I'm not going to take it off the players completely, though. I think that's one of the tough things, Keith. And it's not even about the NIL era, but certainly in this era that we're in now, it's okay to hold players accountable too. There was from a production standpoint, from the guys that you would expect or you were hoping for to be able to step up. And I'm not saying they were always placed in the best positions to succeed. That starts the coaching staff, no question about it, whether it be pitching, whether it be the batting lineup, whatever the case may be. But there were times where South Carolina just wasn't able to produce. And I think that's one thing when you look, because we talk about it from a football standpoint. I think football is a great analogy for this. One thing that we've talked about for years with South Carolina, we just felt like, and I say I felt like a lot of people in the area, fan base, media included, that South Carolina just didn't have the bodies to compete against SEC teams in the trenches. So what did Beamer and this coaching staff do over the last couple of years? They've gone out and they've really built up that defensive line. It goes without saying what we saw last year, not just from a high school standpoint, but from the transfer portal as well. And you see what South Carolina has coming back from a depth standpoint. Obviously, as we know, offensive lineman, you got to figure out the continuity and find the top 5 guys. But we get that. But from just a body standpoint, they've been able to to beef that up. So I use that analogy because from a baseball standpoint, what does South Carolina need to do to be able to get themselves back into a position where they can be able to get the top type of talent? And I think the frustrating part to me, Keith, isn't the fact of, where this program was 15, 16 years ago. Those people need to shut the hell up. I'm going to get yelled at for saying that. But you got to move on because at some point you're going to sound like the friggin' Dallas Cowboy fans. I'm experiencing it right now with Patriot fans. Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, they're not walking through that door. Okay? This program, no one's taking away what you did, but the past isn't going to help you anymore, unfortunately. You need to be able to go out there and there's so much friggin' talent in the state in baseball. There's so much talent. Win within and continue to build it up. I think that's the thing that frustrates me. And I say, I get sick and tired though, Keith, of hearing about what happened 15 years ago, what happened 14 years ago. It was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. There's things that span did with their playoff win streak that will probably never be replicated. But at the same time, too, you got to keep looking forward. Complaining about, this was a prop. We know that. But at some point, you're going to sound like Cowboy fans. And it gets me all worked up.
All right, so we will see. All right, so let's talk about something that we are looking forward to, and that is South Carolina football coming off a 9-win season. Right there is a playoff contender, won 6 straight to end the season, including several over ranked opponents, Texas A&M, Missouri, and at Clemson, Lenora Sellers put on the Superman cape and was unstoppable. I know you've been doing a deep dive and breakdown position by position of this team on GamecockCentral.com. If you're not a member, go over there and read Mike's stuff. It's really good. Mike, give me 2 or 3 reasons for optimism for this team to be a contender or maybe a college football playoff team, and then maybe 2 or 3 concerns you have going into the season that you have about this team.
Well, let's go with the one that everyone would say first, Lenore Sellers. The fact that he just has experience, the fact that he has a offensive coordinator that he's been able to work with already for a year. Now, listen, there's going to be some type of growing pains, just like there's growing pains with any type of relationship. And until we fully see Shula in action against Virginia Tech, we're not going to have a true idea of what that looks like in a game. You can go back to the Illinois game, but guess what? You had some of your top players out that game. Rocket Sanders wasn't playing. It was different. And you're not going to be able to add all the new wrinkles that Shula wanted to add. There's different terminology that they're using as well now. Some of it is similar. Some of the concepts are similar. I can tell you from talking to people in that building, but there's going to be some type of growing pains. But it's good because Shula knows the strengths of Sellers, and Sellers understands Shula. He knows what he's about, and they have a good rapport. So I think it starts with that. The fact that you're not going through, oh, man, we have a new offensive coordinator. What the hell is that going to look like from our star quarterback? Blah, 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 blah. The other thing that I do like is the fact that Boaz Stanley's come in, transfer, and he has looked like a veteran in the sense of being in that building. You know, from talking to some people, I put this out in the spring, one of the players on offense compared him to a mini version of Vershawn Lee, not just from a talent standpoint, but from a knowledge standpoint. You know, when you have a quarterback that is working with a new center, you worry sometimes, okay, and I actually asked this question to Beamer when I was down there a couple weeks ago, how much of that do you have to worry about? You know, Sellers having to help out some of these centers, and Stanley understands what the hell he's doing, you know? So I say that because I think that is so important. The fact that you have a center that understands what the heck he's doing, and there's not going to be this, I put in air quotes, babysitting that Sellers is going to have to do, and Sellers can just go out there and play. The other thing, too, from a defensive standpoint, I would say just the impact that Brandon Cisse has been able to have, because he's a guy that can play not just cornerback, but he can play nickel as well. And from talking to some of the coaches on that staff, it's going to take a lot for them to move Jalen Kilgore back to safety, simply because when you have a guy that has 5 interceptions the year before at nickel, you know, why fix something if it's not broken? But at the same time, too, you have that flexibility. And if Vakari Swain comes back and he's able to look like the Vakari Swain that they expect him to be this year, now it's going to give South Carolina some flexibility. And if that happens, there'll be some musical chairs. DQ Smith, I've been told, he's going to slide on over into Nick Eamon-Worry's role to allow him to play a little bit more freer. So I think the big thing is, from a defensive standpoint, because of the transfer with Brandon, he's able to give you a couple different looks, and you're able to have that versatility. And when you have versatility, man, that allows you to be able to take advantage of the talent you've been able to accumulate.
No doubt about it. So, obviously, Kai Kroger's gone. Alex Herrera, not a great year, but solid. He had never attempted a field goal this year. It looks like Mason Love is probably going to be the punter and the field goal kicker. Hopefully Max Kelly or somebody else can handle the kicks. You know, they did mention that Mason Love may hold as well. If he does that, he'd have to be, Barry Allen to be able to hold and kick the same football.
He'll do a drop kick.
You know, those didn't work out for Kyle Kroger only once against Alabama. But, you know, there are some questions about the youth, but I love Fred J.R. Johnson, Justin Okoronkwo, and Murphy. Those guys at linebacker, extremely athletic. You brought in 4 freshmen as well. Josh Smith from Dutch Fork, and the absolute freak from Havelock, who could be a defensive end as well. I can never remember that kid's name. I don't know why. But at any rate, you also lost 4 defensive tackles. Yeah. South Carolina did add another defensive tackle in the spring. They added Gabriel Brownlow Dendy. They had the number 1 JUCO in the country. They had Devontae Miles from Bowling Green. And you return, two players as well. Monkel Goodwine and Nick Barrett.
Yep.
Is that enough for Travian Robertson? And, you know, you're going to have probably the best defensive player on the field every game with Dylan Stewart and the best quarterback every game in Lenora Sellers. Maybe LSU you can make a case with Garrett Nussmeier, but on defense, the secondary definitely going to be a strength. How are you feeling about that front six?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about three things that excite me, three things that concern me, and one of them goes to the point that you just brought up, the defensive tackles. And this is a stat that I've just been, repeating over and over and over, but it's really important to remind people is that South Carolina is losing over 1,500 snaps from that defensive tackle room from a year ago, just from last year alone, with losing four of those guys. And not just losing four guys, but four guys that all had opportunities to play for NFL teams. I think three have gone on to sign with teams. I'll have to double check that. But the point being is you're losing a lot of not just experience, but production. And I think one thing that people need to remember as well, and not to take anything away from Dylan Stewart, not to take anything away from Kyle Kennard, but they're not able to have the type of production that they had last season if you don't have good defensive tackles. It becomes a hell of a lot easier for an offensive line to be able to go out there and eliminate a guy like Dylan Stewart, eliminate a guy like Kyle Kennard when you don't have to worry about defensive tackles because they're not getting the constant push up front. So from this standpoint, when you look at what's in that room, and certainly to hear some of the positives that came out of the spring, to see that guy like Goodwin was able to do some good things this spring, and to hear his name constantly brought up, to hear about Brownlow Dindy coming in and just being an absolute force. To go on top of that, a guy like Nick Barrett, who from talking to the coaching staff, they were very excited about this spring because it was the first time that he's gone through a winter workout where he was healthy, 100% healthy. So I think that's what they're leaning on the most. And certainly when you have a guy like Hardy, who this coaching staff, even going back to the days when Jimmy Lindsey was still here, right? Like this was a guy that they were very excited about. Well, now he is here. The question is, how quick will he be able to pick up this game, this speed, and everything that comes with playing college football? To me, I think you don't want to bank on true freshman or a guy that is coming from JUCO to make an impact right away. If he can, phenomenal. But I'm not banking on that. You're just hoping that he's able to pick things up quickly so that as the season goes on, he's able to provide you some depth in that room. So it's a big question mark, but coming out of the spring, I do feel a little bit better based on some of the positives we heard about that room.
Yeah, Donovan Darden is the kid from Havelock. He is a freak athlete. I think he could be a designated pass rusher. You also added Damon Clowney and George Wilson, a former Gamecock commit, to bolster the defensive end depth. And then you added from the transfer portal Troy Pikes from Georgia Southern, who, look, I mean, TJ Sanders was a borderline first rounder. Buffalo had a first round grade on him, and they were elated he was there at the top of the second round. They had a pick. They grabbed him. Troy Pikes, Tonka Hemingway, I think he was a fourth or fifth round pick. They like Troy Pikes because he possesses that quick twitch athletic ability that they kind of had in a Tonka Hemingway, TJ Sanders type of player, and so does Hardy. But again, nutrition, weight room, it's not the same in junior college. We'll see how quickly he develops. But just your thoughts on, again, second year in a row, South Carolina is going to have a field goal kicker that the first time he runs out there, it'll be the first time he's ever attempted a kick in a college game. And, what if Mason Love, his first field goal is, it's 4th and 7. It's 24-22 Virginia Tech. there's 3 seconds on the clock, and he's lined up for a 47-yard field goal attempt. I mean, that's not an ideal scenario for a freshman who's never done it before.
No, and look, I think the beauty of it is you look at what South Carolina had, and obviously, Mitch Jeter, he decided after playing 4 years, he was here for 4 years, he decided to go get a different degree at Notre Dame. I know some Gamecock fans, they'll be upset by that, and I get that, but to me, you can't knock the kid. Did 4 years, he wanted to go get a degree in something else, and he went. But I bring that up because USC they were able to go through many years with having the same combination of punter, place kicker, and their long snapper. I think that's extremely underrated, is the fact that you're losing Hunter Rogers, who was
in the holder as well.
Kroger as well. Yep, with Kroger. Just to be able to have that consistency from those positions. I mean, shoot, Hunter Rogers also got invited to an NFL minicamp. So it goes to show you, I mean, how rare is that if you include Mitch Jeter in the mix? Because, again, he played the majority of his career at South Carolina. I mean, his first 2 kicks, they were over 50 yards when he finally got out there in terms of being a starter. I think that was was that the Georgia Southern? I got to go back and remember who they played that first game. It wasn't East Carolina, but the point being is the first time that he had a chance to be a starter. So I say that because you had 3 guys, your place kicker, your punter, and your long snapper. You just don't see that. So to be able to find that again, and I can tell you from having many conversations over the last couple months, and I've shared some of it on Gamecock Central, but talking with Kai Kroger, Kai has told me, he's like, man, I'm lucky Mason Love didn't come in around the same time I got here. He's like, that's how special he's going to be. And here's a guy that just signed with the friggin' New York Jets, for crying out loud. So it should excite Gamecock fans as far as what he's able to do as a punter. Kai's also told me that from a holding standpoint, he has really improved. I believe, if I have it correct, that they lived together this spring. So they were working out constantly together, especially leading up to spring ball. So, I mean, for Mason to be able to have a mentor to be able to learn from like Kai Kroger, my goodness. And they went out there, would get some extra work in. I mean, not a bad person to learn from, good dude as well. But it will be interesting to see if he does take on that place kicker role. If he does, which I don't think South Carolina in a perfect world wants to have him do. But if they're in that position where they don't have a choice, what we saw in the spring game and what we've been hearing, and obviously going back to what we saw in high school, he's pretty damn good at it. It's not like it's the worst thing in the world, I'd rather, if that's your worst problem at special teams, that's not a bad place to be. You'd rather have something like that than someone that can't kick, altogether, if that makes sense, Keith.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually more optimistic about Mason Love than I was Alex Herrera. Again, though, it'll be the first time in a game he's punted or kicked. I'm kind of intrigued because, look, I know Luke Doty's inserted himself in the backup quarterback spot, but to me, the benefit of Kai Kroger was not just that dude had hands like a wide receiver and could basically put down anything. I mean, I think he could be the holder for the Jets as well as the punter.
No question. That's a very good point because, I mean, there were times, and Hunter was very consistent, but Hunter would tell you, I mean, there's times, rainy game, wherever the case may be, there were high snaps. And, I mean, shoot, whether it be punter, whether it be as a placeholder, Keith, you saw it, we all saw it. Kai would go up sometimes one hand, two. I mean, he'd make incredible catches, and he was able to save you. I mean, in football, especially in the NFL, I believe that, what's the number? I just heard it the other day. I want to say 90% of games in the NFL, one possession games, they end in one possession. I got to go back and get that exact number, so it could be a little bit off with that. But the point being is, you have a high snap like that in the NFL, right? Or a bad snap on an extra point and your placeholder can't hold it. That's the difference. Now you bring it down to college, that number certainly changes because there's more blowouts. But the point is, South Carolina, how many games were close that we've seen over the last couple of years? Kai doesn't make that catch and the snap goes over his head. I mean, South Carolina, look at that record. That could have changed dramatically. Never mind the impact that he had in terms of flipping the field. We're just talking about holding on to it so the ball doesn't go over his head.
Right, and his ability to pass. That's why I'm intrigued.
Too.
I would love to see Luke Doty be the holder because he was a high school wide receiver. He's a run threat and a threat to pass. As well as one of the best athletes on the team. I really think he could be a weapon, and with his hands as a former high school and college wide receiver.
It's a good point, Keith.
To me, it just makes a lot of sense for him to be the holder and not William Joyce or somebody like Peyton Arden or
it's a good point.
Something like that.
I like where your head's at.
I appreciate it. All right, so big picture, Mike. I even saw this post on the message board. I couldn't believe it. Oh, we need Lenoris maybe not to have a gigantic year, so we have him for 2 more years. I mean, dude, get out of the basement, quit eating Cheetos, and get out in the sun and get some vitamin D. We want Lenoris Sellers to have a great season. We want him to lead South Carolina to a 10-win season, a spot in the SEC championship game, or and be in New York City at the Downtown Athletic Club as one of 3 or 4 Heisman finalists, and then be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. I mean, that's what gives South Carolina the best chance at being the college football playoff.
The interesting thing about Lenoris more than anything, we see, especially at this time of the year, it's talking season, right? So you start to see some of these mock drafts, mock top 10 quarterbacks in the country, all that kind of stuff, right? And it is funny to hear people get upset. It's like, hey, what do you mean? Lenoris isn't ahead of this person, or, what do you mean he's not going to be drafted at this point? And yet there's a portion of that fan base that will say that, and they'll mention the things that you said. Man, I hope he comes back the following year, though. What? You can't have your cake and eat it too. Now, in a perfect world, he's able to go out there, he's able to ball out, and he's able to have a high draft grade, because the message that sends, and again, it is very difficult from an offensive coordinator standpoint, especially for South Carolina, because I think you have to go back to the days of when Steve Spurrier and Spurrier Jr. were working with the offense. We know who really was calling the shots, but you haven't had an offensive coordinator here for 3 seasons or more since those days, which is just wild to me. Now, coordinators, they typically, especially offensive coordinators, they don't typically last long, but you'd like to see an offensive coordinator last, for at least 3 seasons, 4 seasons. I say all that to say, if Shula is able to do that with Sellers, and I'm not saying that Aaron Nolan's going to have the exact same type of skill sets, or a guy like Cutter Woods will have the exact same type of skill sets, or, you get Landon Duckworth if he's able to, recommit to South Carolina, or you go out and you're able to get someone else in the near future. I'm not saying they're going to have the exact same skill sets, but if he's able to have success, and then he goes on to be never mind the Heisman, but he goes on to be a first-round draft pick in the NFL, you want to talk about the ultimate compliment, the ultimate thing that can help you from a recruiting standpoint, especially with getting a top talent at quarterback. That's it. That's it. Who wouldn't want to work with Mike Shula if he's able to do that this year? Who wouldn't want to be able to do that? So, again, we're going to have to wait and see how it plays out, because obviously Shula's taken over the OC duties. But to me, that's what you should be cheering for, to your point, but it helps you. It helps you from a long stand, oh, you know what? Yeah, let's not have him be good this year. Yeah, that's great. That's really good. That's going to make a difference. Like, are you out of your friggin' mind?
I agree. Mike, great stuff. I can't thank you enough for jumping on with us. Enjoy the New England weather up there. I remember coming up to Maine for my daughter's godfather's graduation from the University of Maine. The grass was so green, and it was also because it thawed out. It was the first time since early in the fall when they could actually have funerals and put people in the ground. Maybe not that cold in Rhode Island as it is in Maine, but I know it's beautiful up there. The summer will be magnificent. Enjoy it. Thanks for being so generous with your time and hopping on today. Great stuff as always. We'll look forward to catching up with you down the road, my friend.
Always a pleasure, Keith. Appreciate you having me on.
All right. That was Mike Uva and Alex Jones, and that'll be a wrap for Gamecock Pod Live. We'll be back next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, Keith Allsep saying God bless, go Gamecocks, and please, Pulmonary, retire, come to a settlement or something, because the board will never go for paying $7 million to buy him out. All right. I'm out of here, guys. Have a great rest of the week.